vintage guitars, and I've always been, I've always tried to make new guitars that sound old. And we did get a wood sample from one of our dealers in Canada of this torrefied wood. And I'd heard about it. Some electric builders have been using, torrefied wood. Tom Anderson, uses torrefied necks. Ernie Ball, a couple of European makers. I've been curious as to what it's all about, but never really paid much attention. And then, one day, UPS package arrives with some tops. And boy, did they look, smell, feel, and sound different. I mean, the main difference you can tell is in the color. Well, you can see over here, this is a torrefied top, the standard with untreated bracing.
Right.
And you can see the color difference between new spruce and. But you look at an older vintage guitar, and these tops are these gorgeous sort of pumpkin brown, deep color, and put a finish on this, and that's pretty much what you have. The wood is essentially cooked at a low temperature in an oxygen-free environment. There's a little bit more to it than that. It's pressurized. They use steam at some point in the process, but the idea is that all of the volatiles in the wood get cooked off in a way that it kind of goes off into the atmosphere. By volatiles, I mean the sugars, the resins, the oils. If you looked at the structure of spruce under a microscope, it's like a bundle of straws, that go like the length of the tree.
Right.
And the straws have these valves in them that keep the sap and whatever from flowing back down by gravity. It takes a long time for these valves to
empty.
To empty and disintegrate, exactly. And what happens is, so before they disintegrate, the material on the inside will, solidify essentially, and it just takes longer and longer for the sap and resin to get out of there. But eventually it does. It oxidizes. I mean, it's an organic substance, and it kind of rots away over time. The material that gets cooked away has the effect of damping vibration, and once it's removed, the top is able to vibrate more freely.
So it's more resonant?
It's more resonant. It has a higher velocity of sound.
Got it.
It's also lighter, so you end up with a greater stiffness to weight ratio, which is what you're looking for in a top anyhow.
Right.
Over time, tops stiffen up, and they stop moving around, and so a lot of that process has already happened. With these particular tops, they don't sound like old guitars. I mean, we don't claim that they sound vintage, but they sound a lot more broken in. They've got the look and the feel, and I mean, they certainly have a lot in common with older guitars. Very quick response. We were just Derek and I were just talking about the tonal difference. I think what happens is, a new guitar tends to have a little muddy mid-range, that gets kind of played out of it as the guitar is played. That mid-range tends to tame down, and more of the highs and the lows become apparent, and the mid-range tends to scoop a little bit.
Right.
It seems to, these guitars seem to start out with a little less of that muddy mid-range, that little cloudy something or other that you identify with a brand new guitar.
Sure.
I mean, there's a lot of advantages, and one of them is that a torrefied wood doesn't take on and lose moisture as quickly. So it's more stable.
Right. Well, it's already had,
like an older guitar, brand new guitar. You go through the first season, you get all kinds of seasonal changes
and checking all over the finish.
And but a vintage guitar, can be very even from season to season.
So it's been through it.
So it's been through it. We've only been building these guitars, since late last winter, and so we haven't gone through a full seasonal cycle. But through the summer, we've had almost no adjustment, no action adjustment. We're not just putting these tops on any guitar. What we've done is we've developed a series of models.
Okay.
The H-Tone series, and so we're pairing the tops with some vintage appointments and with a new finish, which is a very thin, hard finish that's kind of meant to essentially mimic what aged lacquer is like. I can talk a little bit more about that later, but we're putting all of these into a package rather than just throwing the top out right now.
So you're not crafting this to fit a quota. You're crafting it based on the wood available and the.
Yeah, the wood is fairly available. It will probably be available to any other manufacturer fairly soon. I mean, I expressed an early interest in the samples that I was sent, and I used up all of the samples that the supplier, had. I know they've sent some out, but I bought up what he had, and probably by next year, they'll be stocked up enough, so that we'll be seeing the wood, torrefied spruce, Adirondack spruce tops,
right,
should be available to the industry. So we, like I say, we want to do something special with it rather than just throw the top on any old guitar as a custom option.
Sure.
We made some specific models to try to give it an identity. Yeah, the H-Tone finish is something we've been playing with different finishes over time, and it sort of got developed at about the same time when we developed the H-Tone tops, and they seem to naturally go together. The idea behind the finish is that, if you look at an older, like a 75-year-old finish, well, we have an infrared meter. You can measure film thickness.
Right.
So a new lacquer finish, a well-applied lacquer finish might be 8 or 10 thousandths of an inch thick. Over time, that'll end up being about a third of that thickness.
Sure.
Because lacquer just never fully cures. It just kind of keeps transforming and gets thinner and more thinner and denser and harder as it cures, and eventually it disintegrates. It's kind of like concrete. Concrete actually does the same thing, only it's more like hundreds of years instead of many decades for lacquer. But somewhere along the way, a good lacquer finish is very hard and very thin, and still very viable, and that's when the guitars sound best.
Right.
So you can't spray an old lacquer finish, so we've been trying to get something, find a new material, exactly, that we can spray at that same film thickness that lacquer ends up at, and has the same hardness properties. And we found something from one of our suppliers, which they don't even know what it is.
So it's not a poly or nitrocellulose or anything.
Well,
like
we
that.
asked them what it was, and they said, well, if you analyze the molecule one way, it's this. If you analyze the molecule another way, it's a cyanoacrylate. Whoa, wait a minute. It's a sprayable super glue? And they said, well, yeah, you can look at it that way.
Huh.
So we do know that...
Does it say that this is unique to you guys? Nobody else is using this as a finish?
We don't know that anyone else is using it as a guitar finish at the moment. What I wanted to say is that we will use super glue for touch-up sometimes. If our primer coats have a little low spot, or take a little ding, or have some problem and you need a fairly quick filler, you can use some super glue, but you have to be careful and not use too much, because the super glue is so much harder than everything else that you just want to put a little mound and sand it level. But if you put too much on, you try sanding it down, you wear away the finish beside it, and you never get flat.
Right.
So that's how we know how hard that stuff is. So imagine, using like just a micro finish of that
over the whole guitar,
over the entire guitar.
In theory, it would be pretty resilient and
yeah.
last
I mean,
a while.
any thin finish. Let's put it this way: the thicker the finish, the more durable the top is if it takes a dent.
Right. That's
so you've got to be careful, in that sense. But we build expensive guitars, and in general, the customers who buy these guitars know to take care of them. They don't get dragged around to the beach or whatever, and so I feel like these finishes are going to hold up pretty well to the kind of use that our other guitars would normally get.